So I've obtained Zhongli way back in version 2.4, and I still use him to this very day because of how good he is, and how well he fits into various teams. Due to this, I've tested multiple builds and teams with Zhongli, and I'll show you various ways to use him, along with his best builds, in order to use Zhongli to his maximum potential. So let's get started. First of all, let's have a look at his talents and abilities, which will help in understanding what he does and how to use him properly. So using Zhongli's normal attacks will perform up to 6 consecutive strikes, dealing physical damage. Holding the attack button will make him lunge forward at the cost of some stamina, causing stone spears to fall along his path, dealing physical damage. And tapping the attack button in mid-air will perform a plunge attack, dealing an AoE physical damage upon impact. Now, since Zhongli is first and foremost a support character, you'll most likely never use his normal charged or plunge attacks unless you want to build him as an on-field DPS, which I'll talk about later in the video. But for now, let's focus on Zhongli's elemental skill, as he provides most of his support utilities through his E-skill. And his E-skill works differently based on whether you tap or hold it. When you tap his elemental skill, he creates a stone pillar in front of him, dealing AoE geo damage to enemies. And as long as his pillar remains in the field, it'll periodically deal geo damage in a small area. It can also resonate with nearby geo constructs to deal additional geo damage to surrounding opponents. You can also use his pillar to block or avoid some of the incoming enemy attacks, or you can simply climb it to reach certain locations. However, just like any other geo construct in the game, his pillar can break easily, especially while fighting against bosses. Also, he can only create one pillar at a time, so if you try to create another pillar, then the old one will disappear. Now holding his elemental skill deals AoE geo damage and creates a jade shield. This will also create a stone pillar if he hasn't created one already. While using this skill, he causes nearby geo energy to explode in a small area, which is really helpful for mining ores or for breaking any geo objects. Also, if there are enemies nearby having a geo element, this skill will drain a large amount of geo element from a maximum of 2 such enemies. This gives you an edge against those annoying enemies with a large amount of geo energy. And when it comes to Zhongli's shield, its damage absorption scales based on Zhongli's max HP, so the more HP he has, the stronger his shield will be. Also, his shield possesses 150% damage absorption against all elemental and physical damage, meaning that his shield can take all types of damage 1.5 times more effectively. Not only that, his shield reinforces every time it takes damage, increasing his shield strength by up to 25%. And because of all of these reasons, Zhongli has quite a beefy shield which can absorb most of the incoming damage. On top of that, his shield decreases all elemental and physical resistance of enemies by 20%, which is universally good for every single character in the game and will not only boost the on-field character's damage but will also increase the damage of the characters who are off-field. So his shield not only protects the whole team but also increases their damage. And since his shield duration is higher than its cooldown, he can have 100% uptime on his shield, which provides continuous protection to the entire team. All of this makes Zhongli one of the best shielders in the game. But he is not just a shielder, as when you use his elemental burst, he brings down a meteor dealing massive geo damage to the enemies and applying petrification to those caught in its impact, making them unable to move for a short duration. This creates a perfect opportunity to attack them as they can't dodge the incoming attack or fight back, allowing you to maximize your damage. Unfortunately, this doesn't work against bosses just like freeze reaction, but it works on all other enemies, even the ones having a shield. So it's still an amazing ability. Also, the energy cost of his burst is only 40, which makes it quite easy to cast his burst frequently. But at the same time, he also doesn't generate much energy on his own through his pillar. So he will need help from his party members, especially from a Geo character. As with an additional Geo character, he does regain energy for his burst quite easily, and you would be able to spam his meteor most of the time. This is not only good for petrifying the enemies but is also good for dealing damage to them. Cause with the right build, his meteor can deal a ton of damage to enemies, partly because he has good scaling on his burst, but it's also because of his Ascension passive, which lets Zhongli deal bonus damage based on his max HP, where his meteor gets the highest damage bonus based on his max HP. Because of this, you can also build Zhongli as a sub-DPS nuker, which I'll talk about later in the video. There is also his utility passive talent, which refunds 15% of the ore used when crafting polearm-type weapons. This may not sound like a lot, but it will come in handy in the long run or when you craft multiple polearms in one go. But coming back to Zhongli's abilities, he is basically a shield support unit who decreases enemies' resistance through his shield, and can deal massive damage from his meteor with the right build, as well as petrifies the enemies, giving a tactical advantage to your team. So when it comes to his talent level up priority, you should level up his E-skill talent first, followed by his burst. And you should only level up his normal attack talent if you're looking to build him as an on-field DPS, otherwise you don't need to level this up. Now if you want to get the most out of your Zhongli, then you should build him as a support, as it's very easy to build, doesn't take a lot of resources, and provides a ton of value to the team. In this build, his role is to just provide the shield and buffs to the whole team. As with his shield, the team can deal uninterrupted damage to the enemies without wasting any time dodging the incoming attacks, which effectively increases the damage output of the team. Also, his shield decreases enemies' resistance by 20%, which increases the whole team's damage. And when paired with the right artifact set, his buffs can be really good for the team's damage. Because of that, your main focus should be to build the strongest shield possible without worrying much about his personal damage. And in order to build a stronger shield, you need to stack as much HP as you can on your Zhongli. And for that, you need to use a polearm that provides HP to the wielder, and you need to use an HP sand, an HP goblet, and an HP circlet for the artifacts, preferably with HP rolls on the substats. But if you also want to deal some damage with Zhongli, along with having a good shield, then instead of an HP circlet, you can alternatively use either a crit rate or a crit damage circlet based on his crit ratio to further increase his overall damage, especially his meteor damage. I'd also like to mention that using Favonius Lance on Zhongli with a crit rate circlet is also a really good option, as when Zhongli performs a critical hit, this weapon will periodically generate a small amount of energy particles, which helps in restoring energy for the whole team. This will help in fixing energy issues for teams suffering from lack of elemental particles. Because of that, Favonius Lance also becomes a good weapon choice for Zhongli, along with other HP-based weapons. Now when it comes to his best artifacts for this build, there are several good sets you can choose from depending upon the team composition. The most popular one is the Tenacity of the Millilith set, which is tailor-made for Zhongli. Its 2-piece set provides a 20% increase in max HP, which is obviously good for Zhongli, while the 4-piece set increases all party members' attack by 20% and their shield strength by 30% whenever the wielder's elemental skill hits an opponent. So this set will not only provide everyone with a stronger shield but will also boost their overall attack. Now the effect only lasts for 3 seconds, meaning that the wielder needs to hit an opponent with their elemental skill at least once every 3 seconds, which is not an issue for Zhongli as his pillar deals damage to enemies every 2 seconds, which will keep the 4-piece set effect active all the time. And in order to achieve that, you have to place his pillar as close as possible to the enemies. But if you place it too close to some of the enemies, then it will get cancelled and will not be placed. So you have to be a bit strategic with the pillar placement. And the best time to place it is after Zhongli petrifies the enemy or when the enemy is in a vulnerable state. But if using this set feels too cumbersome to you, then you can use the Noblesse Oblige set, which offers a similar effect and is not dependent on his pillar. This set offers a 20% increase in elemental burst damage and a 20% attack boost to all party members whenever the wielder uses their elemental burst. So with this set, not only Zhongli deals a decent damage from his meteor, but after that he gives a 20% attack boost to the whole team. So this set will be perfect for your Zhongli if you don't want to deal with his pillar placement and want him to deal decent damage from his meteor while providing buffs to the whole team. And with this set, you can also choose to go with a crit-based weapon to further increase his meteor damage. Or you can go with a good energy recharge weapon in order to cast his burst more frequently, which will help in providing the attack boost from this set more consistently to the team. Now, there are some characters whose damage doesn't scale with attack. If you're planning to use Zhongli alongside those characters, the Archaic Petra set will be a better option. Its 2-piece offers a 15% geo damage bonus, and when the wielder obtains an elemental shard created through crystallize reaction, all party members gain a 35% damage bonus for that particular element for 10 seconds. So if Zhongli picks up a Pyro Elemental Shard, then the whole party gains a 35% Pyro damage bonus, and if he gets a Hydro Elemental Shard, then the team gains the same amount of Hydro damage bonus, and so on and so forth. The team can only get one form of elemental damage bonus in this manner. So if Zhongli picks up a Pyro Elemental Shard followed by Hydro, then the team will first get the damage bonus for Pyro, and then the bonus will switch to Hydro, meaning that the team will only get the bonus for one element at any given time. Because of that, this artifact set works the best when you put Zhongli in mono-elemental teams, as the elemental shard generated in those teams will be of only one elemental type, which means you don't have to worry about Zhongli picking up the wrong elemental shard. And since they'll do most of the damage using one specific element, the 35% damage bonus provided by this set for that element will benefit the whole party, not just your main DPS. So it's an amazing set for Zhongli in mono-elemental teams composed of any of these four elements. But if you need to boost the damage of the Dendro characters, you can equip Zhongli with the Deepwood Memories set. Now its 2-piece set bonus is not important here, as with the 4-piece set bonus, Zhongli can reduce Dendro resistance of enemies by 30% whenever his E-skill or burst hit those enemies. This effect can also be triggered off-field using his pillar, but since this effect lasts for 8 seconds, you don't have to actively rely on his pillar to trigger this effect. And when combined with the 20% resistance shred offered by his shield, Zhongli will shred enemies' Dendro resistance by a total of 50%, which makes him an amazing support for Dendro characters when using the Deepwood Memories set. There's also this new artifact set from Natlan which you can use on Zhongli. This artifact set is based on the new Nai Soul mechanism, which is unique to Natlan characters, so only Natlan characters can utilize this set to its maximum potential. But even if Zhongli can't use this set to its full extent, he will still offer a 12% damage bonus to the elements involved in the reaction caused by Zhongli, which includes Geo and any of these four elements. As being a Geo character, he can only trigger a crystallized reaction with one of these four elements. For Zhongli, this set works similarly to the Archaic Petra. The key difference being, with the Archaic Petra set, he provides more damage bonus to these elements but can only offer the buff for one element at any given time. While with this set, he can offer the damage bonus for multiple elements at the same time, and also offers the Geo damage bonus to the whole party, unlike the Archaic Petra set, which only offers the Geo damage bonus to Zhongli. Also, it's much easier to trigger the effect of this set, and the buff lasts 5 seconds longer compared to the Archaic Petra set. So both sets have their pros and cons, and you can use either of them based on your requirements. And if you're getting confused about which artifact set you should pick for your Zhongli, then here's the quick summary of these artifacts which will help you choose the best one for your Zhongli based on the team composition and the enemies your team's gonna fight. Now, when it comes to Zhongli's best teams, he is someone who can fit into most of the teams and is quite flexible. This is due to the fact that his shield provides universal resistance shred, which buffs the damage of every single character, and he can make use of different artifact sets to provide buffs to the team based on the team composition. So ideally, you can use him as a flex slot in almost every single team, or in place of a healer due to his tanky shield. However, he works the best on teams where your main DPS benefits from having a shield, like Hu Tao, who is vulnerable to dying because she stays at low HP to deal maximum damage, or someone like Arlecchino, who can't be healed by others while she is in combat, or for preventing characters like Ganyu or Lai from getting interrupted while they're performing their charged attacks. Having a shield on these characters makes it much easier to use them effectively, which makes Zhongli a great option in those teams. Apart from that, he is especially good in an Anemo or a Dendro team, as his universal resistance shred provides a damage boost to these elements, which is quite important considering there aren't many ways you can buff these elements. The other teams where Zhongli shines are Geo teams, mainly because it's easier to activate the passive of the Geo resonance with Zhongli's shield, providing buffs to all characters while decreasing opponents' Geo resistance, boosting the damage of every single Geo character in the party. Due to this, Zhongli is a great fit in mono Geo or Geo heavy teams, providing excellent support as well as doing decent damage. Now, since Zhongli's meteor has a potential of dealing massive damage, you can also choose to build him as a sub-DPS nuker. For that, this artifact set from Fontaine will be the best option, with its 2-piece providing an 18% attack bonus to the wielder, while the 4-piece gives a 20% geo damage bonus for 10 seconds after the wielder uses their elemental skill, and if the wielder is under a shield granted by crystallize reaction while using their elemental skill, they gain an additional 30% geo damage bonus for the same duration. However, this additional increase will disappear 1 second after that shield is lost. But it's not a biggie for Zhongli, as you only need to keep that shield until Zhongli uses his burst, which hardly takes like 2 to 3 seconds. So it's not that hard to get the additional geo damage bonus for his meteor. This means that Zhongli will get an 18% attack bonus and up to 50% geo damage bonus from this set, which is the best Zhongli can get among all artifact sets available, allowing him to deal the highest amount of damage from his meteor. However, it can be a bit tricky to gain the additional increase in geo damage bonus every single time. So if you want more consistency and simplicity, then you can go with 2-piece Archaic Petra along with 2-piece Noblesse Oblige set. With this combo, Zhongli will get a 15% geo damage bonus and a 20% increase in elemental burst damage, both of which will increase Zhongli's meteor damage. And yes, it's not as great as the previous set if its full passive is in effect. But, if you're unable to gain the additional damage bonus from this set, then all Zhongli is getting is a 20% geo damage bonus and an 18% increase in attack. While with this combo, you're getting an effective 35% damage bonus to his meteor, which is relatively better. So if you don't want to deal with running around picking up shards to activate its passive, then using this combo might be a better option. Now my personal favorite set for Zhongli is the Emblem set, which increases the energy recharge of the wielder by 20% and increases their elemental burst damage by 25% of their total energy recharge. Which means that, for every 100% energy recharge they have, it'll increase their elemental burst damage by 25%. A maximum of 75% damage bonus can be gained in this way, for which the character needs to have a total of 300% energy recharge. Although, most likely you'll get about 200% energy recharge on Zhongli instead of 300, which will give him about a 50% increase in elemental burst damage. And with a high energy recharge, he will not only deal increased damage from his meteor but will also be able to use his burst more frequently. But since we're prioritizing energy recharge over attack or crit damage, his damage won't be as good as with the other sets. So the Emblem set is for those who want to spam Zhongli's meteor, which also deals decent damage. Now regardless of the artifact set you end up choosing for Zhongli, you have to use attack sands, geo goblet, and crit circlets in order to get the best results. As for weapons, you either have to use a crit-based or an attack-based weapon for these sets, while with the Emblem set, a good energy recharge weapon is preferred to better utilize this set's passive. But in case you got a good amount of energy recharge from the substats, you can also go with a crit-based weapon in order to get a better crit ratio, which will further increase his damage. Now, you can build a team for maximizing his meteor damage, but his damage alone will not be enough in most of the situations, so you'll need a proper DPS in your team who will do the heavy lifting while Zhongli's burst is in cooldown. With that in mind, let's have a look at the best teams for Zhongli. So the most ideal team for Zhongli would be a Pyro Geo team, mainly because of the resonance effects which provides a ton of buffs to the whole team, but also because of the crazy supports like Bennett and Zilonen, which can even make my shield support Zhongli with over 50,000 HP and below average crit ratio deal 97k plus damage. While with a proper sub DPS build, he can easily do close to 200,000 damage. And considering the fact that both Zilonen and Bennett also increase the damage of your main DPS, it's not a surprise that this is one of the best teams you can make for your Zhongli. And since both of them are really good supports, they are included in most of the good teams. And here is the list of some of the best teams you can make for sub DPS Zhongli. However, among all of these great teams, the Pyro Geo team has the best team synergy, and will be the most ideal team for Zhongli as a sub DPS nuker. Now some of you may want to build Zhongli as a proper on-field DPS, which is not a far-fetched dream, but it does require a lot of investment. So it's either for those who admire Zhongli's attack animations and want to use him as a DPS, or for those who simply want to deal more damage with Zhongli. And in order to build Zhongli as a DPS, the first thing you need to do is level up his normal attack talent. But you don't need to crown it unless you're really sure, as crowns are very limited in this game. Now the easiest way to build a DPS Zhongli is by building him as a physical DPS, as you can just use a 4-star craftable weapon from Mondstadt and the 4-piece gladiator set, which you automatically get with each and every boss drop. This makes it really easy to build a physical Zhongli. And for this build, you want to use an attack sands instead of HP, followed by a physical goblet and a crit circlet in order to get the best results. But if you want to build the best physical Zhongli possible, then you will need a really good 5-star weapon, preferably Staff of Homa, and the 4-piece Pale Flame set. However, this set's passive is dependent on Zhongli's pillar. And like I've said before, there are certain issues with the placement of Zhongli's pillar, so sometimes it can be a bit tricky to fully activate this set's passive. So instead, you can go with 2-piece Pale Flame along with 2-piece Bloodstained Chivalry, which works nearly as good as the 4-piece Pale Flame set but is independent of Zhongli's pillar. Now if you want to build a lore-accurate Zhongli, then you have to get his signature weapon and give him the 4-piece Retracing Bolide set, as his weapon provides a 20% shield strength as well as tons of attack to Zhongli, while this set gives him 35% shield strength and a 40% damage bonus to his normal and charged attacks while he is protected by his shield, and with the help of Geo-Resonance he will gain another 15% shield strength along with some really good buffs to Zhongli. And with the help of all of this, not only Zhongli will have a stronger shield but will also deal a ton of damage, which is how it should be according to the lore. But regardless of how you choose to build your physical Zhongli, the one thing you need to keep in mind is that it's quite important for the team to trigger Superconduct Reaction, as after triggering a Superconduct Reaction, the enemies affected by it will have their physical resistance decreased by 40% for 12 seconds, which is a great way to increase the physical damage of your Zhongli, and so it's important to keep an Electro and a Cryo unit in the party. For this, the best candidates are Fischl and Mika, cause Fischl does a lot of damage off-field while constantly applying Electro to enemies, which makes it easier to trigger Superconduct Reaction. And since she constantly deals damage using her E-skill, she can also use the Tenacity set to provide 20% attack to the whole party. As for Mika, he is the best cryo support for physical damage, cause through his passive talents he can provide up to 50% physical damage bonus to the on-field character. And at C6, he provides an additional 60% physical crit damage to the active character, which is crazy good for any physical DPS. So he will increase Zhongli's physical damage by a huge margin, especially if he is at C6. But even at C0, he is still a great cryo support for physical Zhongli. Now apart from Mika, Yunjin is also a really good support, who increases the damage of the character performing normal attacks based on her defense, and her buff increases with Constellations, especially at C2 and C3. Also, her inclusion in the party activates Geo-Resonance, which further increases Zhongli's damage, so she is an amazing character to pair with physical Zhongli. However, there are better supports that you can use if you have them. Like you can use Xian Yun instead of Yunjin to use Zhongli as a plunge DPS, as his plunge damage is much bigger than his normal attack damage. And in that case, it's better to replace Fischl with Fiorina for her massive buffs as well as for her great off-field damage. Also, if your Mika is in C6 and you're fighting against a single opponent, then he can only provide about 20 to 30% physical damage bonus, and in that case, using Bennett in place of Mika is also a viable option. And to keep things simple, you can go with this Pyro Geo team, where Sun Yan offers a 15% physical damage bonus to the characters protected by her shield, as well as reduces the opponent's physical resistance by 15% if you have her at C4, and all you have to do to gain her buffs is cast her shield. It's as simple as that. This makes her a good physical support when you're looking to create a user-friendly team for Zhongli. Alternatively, you can replace the supports with good off-field damage dealers who can aid Zhongli in increasing the overall team's damage. So there are a lot of options to choose from regarding physical Zhongli teams, and you can choose the one which best suits your interests. Now, there are more ways to build a DPS Zhongli using the elemental infusion ability provided by some of the characters, like you can infuse his polearm with cryo using Chongyun's E-skill, with hydro via Candace's elemental burst, or with pyro using the elemental burst of C6 Bennett. After that, we can use Zhongli as the respective element's DPS. The reason why this infusion technique works on Zhongli is because of the crazy supports that are available for these elements, as well as the fact that now he can do melt and vaporize reaction with these elements, which alone increases his damage by at least 1.5 times. These are really good reasons to try out the infusion-based teams with Zhongli, and among all of the teams I've tested, I've got the best results with this team, which is based on the reverse vaporize reaction where Zhongli is used as a plunge DPS infused with the pyro element. And if your Benny is not C6, then this exact team is also the best team for physical Zhongli, which makes sense as these three are really good supports who also happen to work amazingly well together and they can turn anyone into a DPS. The only reason why Pyro Zhongli works better with this team compared to physical Zhongli is because C6 Benny's burst also gives 15% pyro damage bonus to Zhongli, and with the help of Furina, Zhongli can vaporize his plunges, which leads to a 100k plus damage for each plunge attack. And since this team performs so well, I've also tried this team on floor 12 in the current Abyss, and as you can see, this team took about 95 seconds to clear the first half, just crossing the recommended 90 seconds mark. But that's because this team didn't get the blessings of the Abyssal Moon, as this Abyss cycle favors pyro damage dealt by normal attacks instead of plunge attacks. But even then, with a better build and a better weapon like Staff of Homa, he would have easily cleared the first half within 90 seconds, which shows how good this team is for Zhongli. Now if you don't have Xian Yun, then sadly you can't use Zhongli as a plunge DPS, and in that case, you can use Yelan for more off-field damage as well as for more consistent vapes. She also provides damage bonus up to 50% to the active character, and keeping her in the team alongside Furina activates Hydro Resonance, which gives 25% increase in max HP to the whole team, which is good for all three of them, and this team's damage is almost as good as the previous team with Xian Yun. So both teams are worth trying out if you have a C6 Bennett. But don't C6 your Benny just to try out these teams, as C6 Bennett has its drawbacks and it does limit the teams in which you can put him. So you should only try out these teams if you already have a C6 Benny. And if you don't have him at C6, then you can either stick with physical Zhongli or you can try out the other infusion-based teams with Chongyun or Candace. And those teams look quite similar with only slight differences. You just pair Zhongli with either Chongyun or Candace depending upon whether you're going with Cryo or Hydro Zhongli. Then you need Kazuha or another good Anemo support alongside Bennett in the last spot. Here, you could also use Furina or Shinha in place of the Anemo unit, and use Zilonen instead of Benny. Or you can replace the Anemo unit with Xiangling for triggering reverse melt with Zhongli's cryo-infused attacks. Using Xian Yun in these teams could also have been a viable option, but she doesn't work as well as she does in the Pyro team. Hence, these are possibly the only good combinations you can go with Cryo or Hydro Zhongli. And overall, these are the best teams among all of the teams I've mentioned for DPS Zhongli, which includes both physical and infusion-based teams. Now, let's have a look at Zhongli's constellations, which will give us a better idea about which of his constellations are worth pulling for. Starting with his first constellation, it gives Zhongli the ability to create two pillars at the same time. This helps Zhongli in covering more area with his pillars and is good for activating the passive effect of some of the artifact sets, adding some flexibility to Zhongli's kit. At C2, using his burst grants a shield to nearby characters after his meteor explodes. So with the help of this, Zhongli can now provide the shield to other players in co-op, meaning that they will also get Zhongli's protection as well as the buff from his shield that decreases enemies' resistance by 20%. This will help them in dealing more damage while staying protected with Zhongli's shield. Now even though he gets the shield after his burst animation plays out, his meteor still gets the resistance decrease buff from his shield. So with his C2, he does the same amount of damage from his burst, regardless of whether he is shield or not while casting his meteor. Also, in teams where you use Zhongli's burst frequently, his C2 will save you a decent amount of time in doing team rotations, as you don't have to hold his E-skill every single time to get his shield. And when you need to place his pillar, all you have to do is tap his E-skill, which has a lower cooldown, making it easier for you to place his pillars. So with his C2, the team rotation will be smoother, placing his pillars will be easier, and he will be able to provide shields to players in co-op, adding a whole new dynamic to Zhongli's abilities. Then his C3 and C5 increases his E-skill and burst talent level by 3, increasing his shield strength and meteor damage. After unlocking C4, his burst radius gets increased and the petrification effect from his burst lasts longer, which means Zhongli can petrify more enemies for a longer duration, making it easier to deal damage to them. And with his C6, he becomes a mini healer, converting 40% of the incoming damage into HP for the active character, where each instance of HP regeneration is capped at 8% of the active character's max HP. Now in most cases, you won't need a healer with Zhongli, as his shield will block all incoming damage. But against mechanisms that apply corrosion or attrition on characters which causes them to lose HP over time, his HP regeneration can be a bit helpful to counter it. However, for characters who want to stay at low HP like Hu Tao or a Staff of Homa user, his HP regeneration will actually be a downgrade, which is something you need to keep in mind if you want to get his C6. Now Zhongli is already amazing at C0 and you don't actually need any of his constellations. However, getting his C2 would be a nice bonus to Zhongli's overall kit, and it seems like a good stopping point while pulling for his constellations. Now, to conclude everything about Zhongli, he is a really good support who can fit in all sorts of teams because of the sheer amount of artifacts he can use, as well as because his shield reduces enemies' resistance against all types of damage, making him suitable in most of the teams as a support. Not only that, he also functions really well as a sub-DPS who has the potential to nuke the enemies, and if you want, you can also use him as an on-field DPS, provided that you're okay with the level of investment it needs. So overall, he is quite a capable character who is very flexible and easy to use and provides a ton of value to the team. And that wraps up everything about Zhongli. Do let me know if you have any doubts in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next video. See ya!
This is an age of gods and monsters. I wish not for dominion. Yet I cannot watch the common folk suffer. Will have order. To cleanse the land and defend our safe harbor. That was the first contract in Liyue. And now, the final contract too has been set in stone.